Hello and welcome back. This is the week 10 lecture. So now that we are finally finished with the literature review, I want us to move on and really start thinking about our actual research papers. Up until now, we've been focused primarily on our sources. We've been reading sources. Obviously, we've been researching and finding sources about our topics. And then we've had a lot of different things that we've needed to do with those sources. Read them, take notes, summarize. We've been doing some paraphrasing, some quoting, and of course, most recently, synthesizing in the lit review. So we've been doing all of that. We've been reading a lot. We've been learning a lot about how to work with sources. And that's all really good. Those are important skills, and we're going to need all of that stuff when we turn to the research paper. But now, around this point of the semester, we need to also start focusing on our own arguments, our own viewpoints. We haven't been doing that really so far. We've been learning, finding information, working with that information that we find in our sources. But at a certain point, as I've kind of hinted at earlier in the semester, at a certain point, we will need to make original arguments about our research topics. And of course, we will have our sources to help us produce evidence. The sources will help to support our points, our ideas. We can also push back against some other sources. They can serve as our opponents. So the sources will help us a lot. We're going to have a lot of material at our disposal, but we are going to have to get argumentative. And we're going to have to get original. See, up until now, we've been mostly focused on accurately summarizing and paraphrasing and quoting our sources. But when we start to develop arguments of our own, we're going to need ideas of our own, facts and knowledge of our own that we've picked up through our reading, through our research. But eventually, we are going to have to make arguments that are recognizably ours. We can't just summarize what other people have said. We can do some of that, but we also have to have a thesis of our own that we can support and develop in a lengthy research paper. So this week we can start working a little bit more on developing arguments of our own. And this is a long process, like everything else in this class. It really is meant to take place over multiple weeks. I don't necessarily expect you guys to have an argument by tomorrow or by the end of week 10. What we're going to start with really will just be a series of sort of idea generation or brainstorming activities, but we're going to focus on developing claims throughout this week. And I'll talk more in a moment about what a claim is. But we're going to need a lot of them. So this week we're going to start writing down claims. Some of them will be really good and worth keeping, and they're going to eventually appear in some form in our research paper. Other claims that we write down this week might not be as good, and we might decide that we don't want to stick with them. And that's okay. We're not going to necessarily use everything that we come up with this week in these early brainstorming activities, but if you can keep even half of the claims that you write down this week, if you can keep 25%, that's still a really good start. And you'll be able to add more as you get more comfortable doing this kind of work. But let's start today by talking about a very important distinction between a debatable claim, which is the lifeblood of any research paper. So we have a debatable claim on one side and a statement of fact on the other side. Let's really focus for a moment on the difference between those two concepts, because this is a really important idea that we have to understand before we get started on the research papers. So it's good to just write down some definitions for these terms, and I've already done this for you in the week 10 overview. So a statement of fact is simply an obviously true statement. It's something that most reasonable adults can probably agree on. And the reason it's so obvious, the reason it's obviously true, is because it's very easily verifiable. So, a statement of fact, while useful in many ways, it cannot serve as the springboard for an argument because we can't really argue about a statement of fact. It's just true. It just is. We might not like it. We might have different ways to feel about it, but it's true. So we're very limited in how much of a debate we can really have about it. So we like statements of fact. You're going to need some statements of fact in your research papers, but you never want to mistake a statement of fact for a thesis. Because a thesis has to be debatable. It has to be original. It has to be a claim. And you're going to have a lot of claims throughout your paper, and a claim is very different than a statement of fact. So a claim, by definition, is a debatable assertion that is somewhat controversial. In other words, not everybody will agree about a particular claim. It is a debatable assertion. That means it can spark debate. People are going to have different viewpoints, different opinions about it. And it's not going to be so easy to verify because in many cases there are lots of sides to the debate. It's somewhat opinion based. It's somewhat subjective. So it might be kind of hard to say, well, this person's totally wrong. This person's totally right. It's a matter of opinion. It's also a matter of evidence. We can bring evidence in to support various opinions. But debates have sort of a life of their own, and they can go in a lot of different directions. They can involve a lot of different people with a lot of different viewpoints, and they can all provide evidence to support their claims. And we can have a productive debate where we might actually be learning, even if we're not agreeing with everybody. So a debate is what we want in the research paper, or to put it more accurately, we are taking part. As writers, we are participating in ongoing debates. We talked about this a little bit back in week 5, I think it was, or maybe week 4, when we were choosing our research topics. I told you guys to kind of imagine that you are jumping into debates that have already been going on, surrounding these research topics that we selected. In a lot of cases, these topics have been argued about for years, maybe for decades. So you're not the first person to sort of get involved. Other people have already been having a debate. The debate's been going on for a long time. Perhaps it has evolved. It has changed maybe over time. But you are participating in this ongoing debate. So that's important to keep in mind. You can't simply summarize. You can't simply restate true statements. Obviously, you want some true statements. We always like those. But those true statements are going to be serving your claims. Your claims are the most important sentences that you'll have in your research paper. And they need to come from you. So in some cases, your claims might be very similar to some claims made by other people talking about the same topic. Some of your claims might be similar to claims made by some of your sources, but they can't be identical. You can always build on what your sources are doing. You can build new claims on top of the claims of the authors that you've read in your sources. So you can have a dialogue with them. You can build on top of what they've already done, but you need some degree of originality in your claims. That's what makes the argument yours. So I'll give you a really simple example of the difference between a statement of fact and a claim. So an obvious statement of fact could be that Dr. Lackey teaches English 101 and English 102 at Great Basin College. That's a true statement. We can't really have a debate about that. Somebody might not believe you initially when you say that, but all you have to do is pull up the GBC schedule for any given semester, point to my name. You can see the classes. You can verify my identity. It's pretty easy to prove to somebody that I do, in fact, teach those classes at GBC every year and have been doing that for many years. So we can only get so far with a statement of fact, right? We might want to say that. We might need to tell our readers that, but it's not going to spark a debate. It's not going to create a controversy that we can participate in and sort of compete against others inside of that controversy. So that's a statement of fact. It's fine. We can say it, but we're not going to argue about it. However, I could make a claim about Dr. Lackey's English 102 class. I could say that it's a great class. Or I could say that it's a terrible class. I could say that he uses certain pedagogical methods and the results are outstanding. Or I could make the opposite argument. See, those are subjective positions. Those are opinion-based arguments, right? It's good. It's bad, it has certain qualities, it does certain things, or it doesn't have those good qualities and it doesn't accomplish anything, right? Those are claims. And I could marshal evidence to support my claims. No matter what position I'm taking, I could provide evidence that the class is great and is achieving all desired outcomes, or I could probably find evidence that indicates the contrary. But it's a debate. Right? Different people are going to feel different ways about that claim. If I say the class is great, some people are going to agree. A lot of people will not. So we can have a debate. We can have different positions, different viewpoints, different evidence, and let the best set of claims win. So we can get a lot more mileage out of claims because they spark debates, because not everybody will agree with them. There's a lot more you can do. See, the problem with a paper full of nothing but statements of fact is that you're not making an argument. You're not saying anything that anybody could possibly disagree with. So you're just summarizing, you're restating, and that was fine back on the lit review. But obviously with the argumentative research paper, we need an argument. And we need more than just all that good summarizing and paraphrasing. So we're going to start developing claims this week. Okay? And these claims are based on what you've read, what you've learned, what you've gained so far through your research. But remember, the claims are yours. They have to come from you. So in this week's research journal, I really don't want anybody using any online sources, and I really don't want to see anything in terms of similarity scores, because these claims should be original. They should be original sentences written by you. And if they are, even if they sound similar to some other claims made by other people at other times, they're not going to get flagged by Turnitin. So this is one of the few times where I really don't want much of a similarity score at all, because you're not quoting. You really shouldn't be using other people's ideas in this week's research journal. You're really just talking about your own original claims. So to help you generate some of these claims, and again, hopefully some of them will be keepers, we're going to do some kind of basic rhetorical exercises today. We're going to use some classical rhetorical devices that have been around since ancient Greece, introduced, we think, by Aristotle, but who knows, really. But they've been around for a long time. And that's what's important. These are simple ways or strategies to generate original arguments. That's all. So I'm going to give you guys a series of questions based around different categories. And you're going to be answering these questions in regard to your chosen research topics. I want to be really clear. We're not choosing new topics. We're not doing anything new. These are the same topics that you've been researching, hopefully, for the last 5 or 6 weeks. The same topics that you focused on in the lit review, the bibliography, and everything else we've been doing recently. Okay, so by now, you should know a fair amount about the topic. You've read about it, you've consulted many sources about it, you've summarized and paraphrased those sources. So you have a knowledge base of your own now. This is why it's taken us a while to get to this point. We couldn't start developing arguments right away because we didn't know enough about our topics to be able to do that. We needed to have plenty of time to research and build up our base of knowledge. Now that we've done that, it's time to generate claims of our own. So by answering my questions, you'll end up with debatable assertions of your own in the form, hopefully, of complete sentences. Now, again, it's up to you if you want to keep all of these, even the ones that you end up submitting in this week's research journal. Some of those you might keep, some of those you might replace with better ones later on. This is just a way to get the ball rolling. So we're talking today about the topoi. You don't have to remember that term. It's an ancient Greek word, but it means places in the mind. So the idea behind these sort of strategies is just that these are different ways to think about your topic. These are different sort of places in the mind that you can go when thinking about your topic. They're, different questions that you can answer. And your answers to those questions will give you claims that you can build around. You could start doing things with those claims. Because, like we'll see in the weeks to come, a claim can only be effective if you have evidence to go along with it, if you have something to support that claim. So we start with claims, and then for the good claims, we start finding evidence that we can pair with the claims. So let's start by just running through the topoi. So these are 6 different categories, 6 different strategies. And I have a few questions for each one of the 6. Okay? And again, these are like categories, different ways of thinking about your research topic. So as I run through these, you can go ahead and answer them right now, answer my questions now as you're watching, or you can answer them later because I've put them in the week 10 overview as well. But we can always come back and add to these. So whatever you write down initially, whether it's today, tomorrow, later in the week, that's not the final word, right? You can always go back and work more with the topoi because these are just great strategies used to develop arguments, whether they be written, spoken, any kind of argument. It's a good place these topoi can be a good way to get started. All right, so let's start with our number 1 topoi, definition. Okay, let's think about how we would define our research topic. And by doing this, let's just define it ourselves using our own words. So don't look it up. Okay, by now, you don't need any assistance in doing this. Just write down your own definition, similar to what you would find in an online dictionary if you went and looked up a word or term. But by now, you should have an easy way to refer to your topic because you've been researching it, you've been thinking about it. So now you can use that term or that phrase. It's usually going to be more than just a single word. And I want you to write your own definition down, just the way you understand it, the way you would define it. What is it? How would you provide a definition for it for an audience? Also, along with that, think about the larger group or category that your topic might belong to. This is something that we often do when we provide definitions of words or terms. So is there a larger category or like domain that you could place your topic in? Is it a medical or scientific topic? Is it related to technology? Is it related to children or childcare? Is it related to what? Like how would you categorize it? Is it a sort of moral or ethical issue? Is it an economic issue? Is it political? Is it social? Cultural? You can come up with any categories or any sort of larger groups that come to mind. Again, You can use kind of what other people say, what you've heard. You can sort of restate some of the ways maybe that your topic has been categorized or defined in your sources. Again, I don't want you quoting anything. I don't want you to go back and consult a source right now. You can obviously do that later. But for now, just write down your definition and how you would categorize the topic based on what you know, based on what you've learned, what you've read so far. And once you've identified a larger group or category that your topic belongs to, again, that could be based on discipline, it can be based on kind of who the topic affects or who's talking about it. However, you've categorized it or defined it, think a little bit more about the characteristics that it shares with maybe, other members of that group, right? How is it maybe similar to some of the other things in that category, some of the other topics in that group or category that you're classifying it with? So it's just helpful to write your own stipulative definition. You might remember that from 101 if you took my 101, but that just means a definition of your own. Okay, a definition that suits your purposes. What does your topic mean to you, and what larger category could you place it into? All right, so that's number one, our topoi of division. No, I'm sorry, our topoi of definition is number one. Number two is the topoi of division. So this is very similar to the process of analysis, if you remember that from 101. So for part two, when you're dividing your topic up, I would like you to break it down into all of its individual parts or elements. Now, of course, this will be easier to do for some topics compared to others, right? But just do your best. Every topic has different elements or parts that go into it, different branches of it, different people that might be involved, different kinds of knowledge or concepts, different pieces of a history that might be involved. Think of it however it comes to mind, but try to break your topic down into smaller parts. What all goes into your topic? Break it down. Let's get more specific and granular. This one's really helpful. It's good to think about your topic this way, to break it down into more sort of smaller increments, smaller elements. So divide it up into all of its individual parts. Break it down. This is very much what we do when we analyze. You might remember from 101, many of us did analysis in 101. I know we did in my class. So when you're analyzing something, when you're trying to really understand it, and we're definitely doing that with our topics, we like to break it down into all of its individual parts. And we talk about how we can do that with anything. Whether it's a car engine, we can literally take it apart. But even if it's like a concept, something abstract, a theory, an academic concept in economics or, algebra, right? We can break those concepts down by looking at all of their individual parts. What are all the steps? What are all the individual pieces of info that sort of go into those ideas or those theories, those concepts? So whether it's a real tangible thing that you can pick up, or if it's a more abstract thing that really exists more conceptually, you can always break it down into its individual parts. And you can do that really on your own by this point. You shouldn't really need any outside help, just based on what you've read, what you understand. Break it down at least into a few different parts that we can look at and sort of differentiate. And also think about how the parts are working together. That's another part of analysis, right? When we break something down in order to understand it, it's not just about cataloging all of the individual parts. It's also about understanding how those parts work together. What are their relationships? How do the individual parts work together to create the larger thing that we are looking at, in this case, our topics? So you might only be able to take that so far, but do the best you can. Divide your topic up into as many smaller parts as possible and just kind of see what's there. See what you can do with those individual parts. Okay, but again, the questions that you're answering here would be what parts or individual elements make up your topic? And so list them. Okay, that's your first answer. And then the second question would be how do these different parts interact or work together? What relationships do they have? So answer those questions, and you might have a couple of claims that you could do something with. All right. So our third topoi is similarity and difference, basically comparing and contrasting. Pretty simple. We've all done it before, so it should come naturally. Think about what your topic is similar to. So again, you can go back to number one, think about other topics that you might categorize in the same group, into the same category as your topic. How is it similar to those other topics? How is it similar to other debates, other issues, other things that people might be talking about, arguing about right now? And then go the opposite direction. Think about differences. So first, how is it similar to other things? Answer that question. And then the next question will be, how is it different from other topics? How is it even different from those same topics that it's similar to? Because it might be similar to them, but it's also going to be different in certain ways from them. How do we distinguish your topic from other similar topics? What are the distinctions that are important that make your topic different, that maybe even make your topic more important, more pressing, more critical? That's why you're addressing this topic and not a similar, somewhat related topic. So you should be able to do this at least a little bit. Compare it to things that are similar, and then also point out ways that it is different from those similar topics. And you could even go beyond those categories and definitions that you came up with for number one. What else can we compare your topic to? And what are some other things that your topic is very different than? So what are we comparing it to, and what are we contrasting with it? And just come up with as much as you can, and you might have some potential claims there as well. Number 4 is the topoi of cause and effect. So this is a very useful one as well, because you're going to be able to come up with causes and effects. So you might be able to do some work with both. But first, answer the question, what causes your topic to exist? So for some of us, it will be very easy to answer that question. Maybe a particular event or a particular law, a particular piece of legislation, something happened. And then your topic, your issue, whatever it is you're writing about, kind of arose out of that. So if you can find a simple cause or maybe a few causes that led to your topic being a thing, maybe they even created your topic, more or less, then you should be able to answer that question, and that might be something worth thinking about more. You might want to spend some time in your research paper exploring some of the causes of this problem or issue that you are talking about. That's usually a good thing to do. So start by thinking about causes. What has caused your topic to exist? What has caused your topic to be the way that it is right now? What are the causes? Try to identify some of those. And then go in the opposite direction. What effects does your topic cause? So what are some of the consequences of your topic? So you can go before the topic and think about causes, and then you can move beyond the topic or sort of go after the topic and think about the effects that come from the topic. How does the topic affect real people? What are some future repercussions or ramifications that we might be able to predict or anticipate? Like, what effects has your topic caused? What are the consequences that have come about because of your topic? So you can talk about the present moment, things that are happening right now, things that have happened before, but also things that might still happen, things that are predicted to happen in the future. All right, so you can cover a lot of ground with cause and effect, but start with causes, okay, what's created your topic, and then think about the effects that your topic later creates. All right, how does your topic affect the world? How does it affect people? How does it affect society? What are the consequences? They might be good, they might be bad, right? Depending on sort of your angle and what your topic is. But you should be able to come up with some good statements, some good debatable assertions about causes and effects for number 4. All right. But we only have 2 more. We're just going to do 6. There's a lot more topoi. We are just doing some of the general topoi, which are good for any kind of argument. There's also more specialized topoi, which you can use if you're kind of developing more of a specialized sort of intricate argument. But we're going to keep it simple. So we'll move on to number 5. That is the topic or the topoi of negation. Okay, so this is a little bit of a tricky one, but I think we can all do it. We should all be able to come up with at least something here. So ask yourself this question. What happens if your topic was somehow negated or stopped? What happens if it somehow ceases to exist? It goes away. The issue, the problem, the thing, whatever it is, it goes away. It doesn't exist in the world anymore. What would happen? Just kind of conduct this thought experiment. What would happen if your topic simply went away? It's been negated, canceled, gotten rid of. So would that be a good thing? Would that be a bad thing? How would that affect people? How would that change the way things work? How would that change everyday life or our society? Whatever domain you're in. Think about what would happen if that topic is just gone. Your topic is negated or stopped. So what would that look like? What would the results be? Okay, just spend some time kind of thinking about that and then write down your best description of what would in fact happen if your topic was negated. You might not end up doing anything with that, but it might actually prove central to your argument, particularly if you're exploring like a problem or something that needs to be addressed, something that needs to be fixed. It might be very useful to imagine a world where that problem doesn't exist. And we can point to that as a reason why we need to do X, Y, and Z to get rid of this problem, because look at how great things would be if the problem didn't exist. You could also go in the opposite direction. If you're talking about something that's good but might be in danger of getting taken away, right? You could say, hey, if this good thing suddenly vanished, we would be in all kinds of trouble. Let me show you. And that could be compelling evidence as well. So at least try negation. It doesn't work as well for all topics, but you should be able to at least come up with some kind of claim based on negation. And then our final topoi is substitution, similar to negation, but a little bit different. So could you replace your topic, either the whole thing or maybe part of it, could you replace it with something else that is similar? And if you did that, what would happen? Again, paint us a picture of what it might look like if your topic or a part of your topic got replaced by something else. And just, imagine, this is a fictional scenario, but just imagine what it might be. You can even go back to your categories, that you came up with in number 1 and take another topic that's similar to your topic, but it has some key differences. And what happens if you replace yours with that other one, what would that look like? What would happen? What would be the significance of a substitution like that? And you might decide, no, I can't really replace anything in my topic with something else similar because my topic is singular. My topic is unlike these other topics in very important ways. So, as a result, we can't really do a substitution. That's fine. Saying that is a claim. That is a debatable assertion. Not everyone will agree. And you might be able to do something with that, even if your answer is essentially no, I can't do a substitution. But that might be important. That might be a point that you want to make about your topic. It might be something that you want to talk more about. So just take a few moments, whether you're doing it now or if you're doing it later. Once you've just kind of written down whatever comes to mind, this is brainstorming, but once you've kind of answered the questions, to the best of your ability, it might be kind of rough the way you've written down those answers. So try to refine those answers a little bit and turn them into complete sentences, complete thoughts with subjects and verbs, and take a look. Decide which ones you really like. Decide which ones you might be able to do more with. You might decide you don't like the way you're phrasing some of those sentences. You want to keep working on them. You might want to keep revising them. That's fine. But the goal here is to come up with at least 6 original claims, one for each of those topoi that we just ran through. And it would be great if you had more than 6, if you maybe came up with 2 or 3 different claims for maybe cause and effect or similarities and differences, right? So you can certainly go beyond one claim per topoi. That is just the minimum. For this week's research journal, you need 1 original claim at least for each of the 6 topoi. And now we have a start. You have some claims. We can start working more with them. And this will be an ongoing process. Like I said, we want to keep adding to our list of claims. And eventually, our best claim, our strongest claim, our biggest claim will end up being our thesis statement. Right, our original argument, the overview of our argument, that's really what the thesis will be in the research paper. And then we're going to have a bunch of supporting claims that we use to anchor our body paragraphs in the research paper. And all of those supporting claims will support the thesis. They'll all work together, and it will give you plenty. If you have enough claims, you'll have plenty to do in the body of your paper. Because really what we want to do ultimately is build our individual body paragraphs around our best supporting claims. So the more supporting claims we have, the more body paragraphs we probably have, and the better our argument will be. So this is the beginning of planning our papers. But we're at the very early stages, so don't get overwhelmed and don't feel like you have to have your thesis ironed out this week. You don't. You'll need the thesis pretty soon, but this week we're just getting started. We're brainstorming, we're generating ideas, so just focus on coming up with as many good claims as you can based on those 6 topoi. All right. So the other thing I wanted to talk about today, and we'll return to this later, but I just wanted to talk a little about the structure of the research paper and tell you the 4 major parts of the research paper, because we can continue to plan. We're going to need to know this information as we continue to develop claims, pair those claims with evidence, plan body paragraphs. Pretty soon, we're going to need to actually start outlining the research paper. We're going to need to start planning each individual paragraph we plan to write. We don't have to do that this week, but we'll really start doing that next week. And in order to do that well, we have to have a sense of what the research paper is going to look like. What are the different parts? How is it going to unfold or progress over several pages? So, to help you guys with that, I've posted a sample research paper in the Week 10 module. I should probably get a new one. This is a very old paper that I've been using as an example for a while, but it's a real student paper written by a former student of mine. You guys don't need to, study it, read it word for word. I just want you to look at it, and I've labeled it with the four major parts that I'm about to cover. So you can easily see how the student is navigating through those different parts of the paper. And you'll see that the student has everything that they need. They're making good use of sources. They still have an original argument. They have enough content. It's a good example just to glance at so you get a sense of what this kind of paper looks like, what it sounds like, and sort of how it's built. And we can look at some more examples in the weeks to come. But let's just run through these four basic parts. Won't take very long, and maybe I can actually keep this lecture under an hour, which is often a challenge for me. So we start with facts. Okay, our first major part or section of the paper will consist primarily of facts. So up front, at the very beginning, you need to establish some basic facts about your research topic. And once again, this is stuff that you've learned. This is stuff that you know. You might end up citing some of it, like if you want to quote a statistic directly from one of your sources, or if you feel like you need to paraphrase a source to be able to explain exactly what one of these facts is. You can do that, but a lot of the facts can really just come from your knowledge base, your own knowledge that you've developed over the last couple of months. And by the time we're writing, you can add a little more time to that. So a lot of the facts are really just part of your knowledge. And then in other cases, you can paraphrase or maybe even quote. Remember, a lot of your readers are not going to be very familiar with your research topic, and that includes me. Okay, I am far from an expert in many of these areas. So before we jump into your argument, before we get to your best claims and your best evidence, you need to establish certain things about your topic just so we understand, just so your readers understand the topic well enough to then understand your argument about the topic, right? If I don't know anything about, early childhood education, then I'm not going to understand your argument about that topic. You're going to have to tell me a few facts about your topic, whatever you think your readers need to know. It's a decision that you have to make based on your topic, the public's basic familiarity with the topic, and also the argument that you plan to make. And you need to arm your readers with all the knowledge they need in order for them to really get your argument. So this might only take you a few sentences. This could also take you the better part of your intro paragraph. But you have to do it, and you typically do it at the beginning of the paper. You establish some facts. This is almost like providing background info. In a lot of cases, you might have to fill us in on some recent history, some recent developments. You might have to explain a few things, or you might just need to tell us a few of the major players, a few of the recent things that have happened. Just get us oriented. Make sure we understand what your topic is and kind of what you're talking about. All right. It's always step one before we can get to the good stuff. So you should already be accumulating a lot of facts. Again, a lot of these are going to come from your sources. A lot of these will come from what you've read and what you've learned since week 5. So note-taking helps, summarizing helps, and having your sources handy help. But like I was saying, in some cases you might be able to provide facts without even citing them because you just know it, and you have known it now for a while. But if you're getting it directly from a source, yes, paraphrase it, quote it, and then cite it. After facts, we get to definition. So a lot of your facts will be in the intro paragraph. You're also going to have a thesis in the intro paragraph, and that's not just a statement of fact. That's going to be something different. But a lot of the intro paragraph will be statements of fact. Obviously, true things, obvious if you know a lot about your topic, things that you can verify, things that you can present to us as objectively true. Okay, you do a lot of that right off the bat in the intro paragraph. Then you move into your second paragraph and you can provide a few more facts there if needed. But that second paragraph is usually referred to as your definition paragraph. And that's where you define some key terms that your readers need to know in order to understand your argument. So you can get this done usually in just a single paragraph. But in other cases, you might have to do a little bit more definition in your body paragraphs just to kind of explain things and provide more follow-up. But most of your definition should get done early in the paper, the second paragraph right after the intro, before we get into your real bodies. So different people will have to define different things. It just depends on your topic. It depends kind of what goes along with your topic. And for some of us, and I've noticed this from reading summaries and paraphrases, some of us are dealing with highly technical, very sophisticated topics that have very specialized vocabulary in many cases. I'm running into a lot of terms and phrases and words that, frankly, I don't understand. I don't know what they mean. And part of the problem that some of us were having with summarizing and paraphrasing is that we weren't always explaining what those things were in our own words. We were just maybe quoting the author or using the author's word choice, recycling the author's phrasing, but your readers aren't often going to understand that. So you're going to have to define certain language, certain terms, certain concepts, because they're not necessarily going to be part of the general knowledge of your readership. So that's what the definition paragraph is for. Whatever has to be defined, define it. So in some cases, you will be defining actual words or terms or concepts. That's especially true if your topic pertains to science, technology, the medical field. There's a lot of specialized vocabulary that's going to need to be defined when you're working with topics like those. But in other cases, with other topics, you might not so much be defining words like in the classic sense of like going to a dictionary and looking up a definition for a word, but you might just be providing more info, more facts, more explanation about things that aren't going to be familiar to your readers. So in some cases, you might be defining a person, a group, an event. You might be talking more about a history, a timeline, certain developments or things that have happened with your topic in recent years. So really, facts and definition very much work together. They're sort of working together in your first couple of paragraphs of the paper to get your readers educated and oriented about your topic. Now, you don't want to spend too much time doing that because our focus is still on your argument. But before we get to your argument, you need to establish the facts, provide the definitions, and you should be done with most of that by the end of your second paragraph. Okay, the second paragraph of the research paper. And then you really get to the body of your paper. That just means all of your body paragraphs. And this is a long paper. Let's not fixate on length just yet, but it is long. It's going to be longer than the lit review. It's going to be certainly a lot longer than our research journals. So you're going to need a lot of body paragraphs. So that's why I was saying earlier, the more claims we can develop, the better. because ultimately those claims will be sort of the featured highlight of most of our body paragraphs. And we can have a sort of a claim per paragraph, or maybe two claims, two big claims, and maybe one paragraph. But that's how we start planning our paragraphs. We plan them around our claims. That's how we start planning our body paragraphs. So if you have 5 or 6 good claims by the end of this week, you could go ahead and start planning 5 or maybe 6 body paragraphs. Maybe not quite that many, maybe 3, maybe 4 if you're going to double up on some claims. But at minimum, you're going to have a handful of bodies that you can start planning, outlining, and eventually you can write them. So we call our body paragraphs in a research paper quality paragraphs or support paragraphs, because most of the support for your argument will come in those bodies. But also think about what else you're doing. You're sort of describing the qualities of your topic. If you're identifying a problem that needs to be fixed, think about a lot of what you're doing in your bodies as being sort of pointing out negative qualities, pointing out problems, pointing out reasons why it's a problem, who it hurts, who all it affects, how does it, cause other related problems, right? You're really focusing on qualities, the qualities of your topic or the qualities of certain parts of your topic. If your topic's a bad thing that we're trying to fix, then that's largely what you're focusing on in your bodies. If your topic is a good thing that we want to hold on to and preserve, then you're focusing on those good qualities. Why is it good? Who does it help? Why is it beneficial? Why do we need it? Why should we pay for it? Why are we going to keep it around? Right? So no matter what you're doing, no matter what your topic is, no matter what your angle is, you really are kind of developing the qualities of your topic, whether they're good or bad or maybe a little bit of both. That's largely what you're going to be discussing in your bodies. But of course, to be a little more straightforward, we're also providing our claims and our evidence in the bodies. And in addition to those, we might also at times need to summarize and paraphrase some of our sources. So those skills that we worked on in the lit review are also going to come in handy on the research paper. Now, it's important that we don't summarize and paraphrase all the time. We want a balance between our own original claims in these body paragraphs, our own original claims sort of at the forefront of the paragraphs. But then when we need to, we can turn to our sources. We can provide brief summaries, paraphrases, and direct quotes to support our claims, to provide more evidence, or to provide an example of our opposing viewpoint, right? The opponents, what the other side has to say, and then we can respond. So all the paraphrasing, summarizing, quoting that we do from our sources, all of that will serve our claims. All of that exists to help us prove our claims, right? That's what we're doing. And it is opinion based, but at the very least, we want people to accept our claims as possible, as plausible. We want to present evidence that's compelling, pretty convincing, and will make people at least consider our larger argument. So we'll talk more about evidence and how to bring in really good evidence from your sources in the weeks to come. But I want to start by generating claims. Once we have a lot of good claims, we can start planning body paragraphs, and then we can figure out the evidence that we need to support those claims. But all of that work, or at least the vast majority of it, gets done in your body paragraphs. So that's the third part, quality and support. Okay, so part 1, facts, that's quick at the very beginning. Part 2, that's definition, that's really just one paragraph, hopefully, your second paragraph. And then quality and support, that is the biggest section. That will be 5, 6, 8, 9, maybe 10 body paragraphs, depending on the length of your paper. And then near the end of your bodies or at the beginning of your conclusion, you're going to provide the fourth and final big part of the research paper, and that is policy. Policy. You're going to be making a policy recommendation by the end of your paper. So different people do this different ways. In some cases, the policy kind of gets laid out over the course of the bodies. And then you just need to sort of rephrase it, drive it home, remind us of it one final time, maybe in your concluding paragraph. And then you can sign off. A lot of people make what we call policy-based arguments. So, particularly if you're trying to solve a problem or address an issue, your argument might really boil down to here's what we should do. We should do X, Y, and Z in order to fix whatever. Right? So if that's the kind of argument you make, you're probably going to be talking about policy throughout the paper. And then you can just kind of summarize it, remind us of it at the very end. But in other cases, we don't really talk about policy until the end, right? And but I guess I should say this, policy just means what are we going to do about it, right? What is the course of action that you are recommending to your readers? What policy should they take? This is very broad, right? A policy could be almost anything. You could tell them to take a certain action. You could just want them to think or feel a certain way, right? It's whatever you want. But basically, think of the policy as you telling your readers what to do next. Okay, so we've gotten to the end of your paper. We've read through your argument. We understand your claims, your evidence. Now what? What are we supposed to do? Okay, that's really what your policy is. So, again, some of us are going to be talking about that throughout the paper. But in other cases, we might not get to that until the end of our bodies. So, in some cases, we'll have a standalone policy paragraph that's devoted to just laying out your policy recommendation. Here's what we need to do. Call your congressman or, sign a petition or drink less soda or whatever. Okay? It really doesn't matter. It's just what you want your readers to do. What's the course of action? How are they going to be a part of the solution? How are we going to fix the problem? How are we going to maintain the good thing that we want? Whatever. Whatever you want your readers to do, that's what the policy articulates. So you just got to figure out how you're going to get that in there and how big of a part is that going to play in your overall argument. So if you're talking about it throughout, yeah, you can keep it brief, just summarize your policy in the conclusion. But if you don't talk about policy until the end, give us a full policy paragraph, or you can even devote most of your concluding paragraph to laying out the policy. Here's what we need to do next. And that's just a natural way to wrap things up and sign off. So we wait normally until the end to really drive home the policy, just because it's a good way to conclude the paper. Those are the 4 parts. So here in week 10, you should already have a lot of the facts that you'll need. You might already be able to start providing a lot of the definitions that you need. We're probably not ready to do a ton of the quality and support yet, but like I've said, after we've come up with some claims this week, we can at least plan maybe 3 or 4 bodies, knowing all along that we're going to need more later. I don't expect you guys to be able to do much with policy just yet. That's probably going to come later, but just be aware that these are the 4 areas that we are planning. These are the 4 sections of the paper that we eventually have to write. So that, keeping this stuff in mind will help give you some good direction as you finish up your research, as you start brainstorming, start generating claims. Just keep in mind what the end product is going to look like. What do we need for this research paper? And just start building this stuff. And over the next few weeks, we're going to have enough to actually put the paper together. So that's it for this week. If you have questions about the topoi, let me know. I'll start grading lit reviews soon. And it's very important. We only have about 5 or 6 weeks left of instruction. So I want to make sure everybody's keeping up. If you have questions, let me know. We're going to start moving a little bit faster. So next week, we start outlining, we start planning paragraphs. So you got to have claims to be able to do that. At this point, if you fall behind 1 week, that can be a big problem for future weeks. So reach out if you need anything, and I will see you next time.